To echo Edwina and Deborah, thanks everybody for joining us today. Hopefully this will be insightful. There's about £600 million of revenue in this room, going by the people who are in attendance. Not that I counted or anything, but this £600 million is here ultimately because we're all interested in leaning into e-commerce and to getting a bit more from that, and that was covered very well just there. Thanks for the vision of Newry Chamber in being able to see the opportunity here, and that's why today was put on, because we know what's in front of us and we know what we can do. I've seen a few people who are here who I went door to door to invite, and well, I mustn't have done too bad a job since you're here, and well, it's either that or you're here to make sure I don't come back again into your store. It could be either one, but listen, I'll take the win. And thanks everybody for coming. I know some people have had to travel some distance. I'm from Belfast originally, but I've lived here for 8 years, and I have to tell you, I'm still getting used to some of the local ways. To start with, I have to stop myself from saying things like loaning, because I don't believe that's a real word. I have to stop myself reading road signs correctly, such as Camlock. But perhaps my favourite Newry realisation came right at the start. I mean, you can't miss this. And it was one day I pulled up in the car park and I saw a woman frantically waving her arms like this here. And I thought, what the hell? So I can't remember. I got out of the car, went over and thought maybe something wrong, and she put down her window. And there in her hand was a parking ticket. And this was bizarre to me, but it was in that moment I realised that ultimately everyone in Belfast who I got used to in life is out for themselves, and everybody in Newry is out against the state. And I much prefer the latter, so I like it here a lot. Hopefully today's very useful to you, and I'm glad I got a laugh there, because that wasn't on the agreed script, so I'm not looking at Michael. After that opener, I know I only have about 12 minutes, so I'll have to be swift with this. And my history teacher in Belfast would be delighted with me for going back 200 years and starting to cover how commerce and trade used to work, but ultimately Irish e-commerce and trade, or Irish commerce, and trade in the 1800s showed the movement of goods through the classic sort of lanes and passage that would have followed rivers and so on. And that's kind of where the story begins, because that's where our money moved. And over the years then, what happened was people realised where they could go to spend money, and they started travelling extremely far to places like maternity hospitals that were a good distance away because there's so few of them. But at the very top of this graph, what you'll see is they travel very short distances to places like retail premises and stores. And so what that meant was that the money and the movement of capital stayed within small areas that was relatively spent by the consumer and captured by their local retailer. And that was a simpler period. You know, that was easier for people to judge how to stock a shop, because they knew the amount of people in the town who would need milk, etc. And over the years then, that dismantled as technology took over. So for retail, the zones in which the money was spent remained close, local, convenient. A local shop supplied the local people. And this graph sort of touches upon the point that about 95% of spend was historically spent within 40 miles of where a person lived. But perhaps more interestingly, 80% of spend was actually spent within 5 to 10 miles of where the person lived. And what that shows is all of these little small communities of retail spend throughout Ireland that ultimately didn't go too far. And again, as I said previously, that was a simpler time. That was a simpler period for people to judge how to stock a shop, what to put in it, who's going to be coming. And business was in some ways just that little bit easier. Something then happens that is of huge benefit to Newry that we all know, and that is exports. That is the movement of money, of capital from foreign or distant places into the Newry economy. And it's not like a new grocery store opening in Newry, because that is ultimately movement from one part of Newry to another in terms of spend. Why exports are so valuable is because that is capital moving from another state or a foreign place into Newry's economy. That is capital directly dropping in. But over the years that followed that, then we had another thing which matched that, which was imports, and imports started changing things again. So the imports ultimately, despite the fact that the product is moving into the country, the money is actually moving out. And that happened, you know, over a large number of years, but ultimately technology and the movement of people in cars and so on from 1950 onwards started making that speed up. And that is where we then started getting into the early days of money on the move. And that is what ultimately led to e-commerce in the end. So until last week, that world trade lasted for 60 to 70 years. And then all of a sudden, this man that, made super headlines because of the $1 trillion movement in dollars that he had just triggered, that sort of began the end of world trade as we know it. And that changes things. So what we have right now in this world is a very mixed up situation. We have 40-year-olds wearing skinny jeans, and we've got 20-year-olds wearing mum jeans. And that's on one side of the fence. And on the other side, you've got a man in power who is making decisions that is correcting how economics and trade has worked for 60 years. There's no point in standing here judging what way that will go, but what I took from it was it's all leaning the same way for Ireland, and a few of these things come together, which we'll touch upon a small bit later. I need to stick more to the script here before I lose you on something. So ultimately, e-commerce and world trade then are intertwined. World trade leads to e-commerce because of the movement of capital, which didn't previously exist. And what we start seeing then is this local economy engaging in e-commerce. And the presumption over the years was, I think in the early days, was that e-commerce was all about money moving a small bit down the road. Money moving from Newry to Banbridge, or money moving from a Dublin website to a Belfast shopper. And ultimately, that isn't quite how it worked. How it worked more so was the rapid movement of money through the trade of product between the UK and Ireland. And that is probably one of the major points here to showcase the e-commerce economy as we know it, and it's these connected points. It's not Ireland within Ireland, it's Ireland within the UK and Ireland, and I think that has shaped a lot of what the e-commerce opportunity that people have availed of, but it's also probably made it a bit harder for people to jump into that because they're having to look at markets that's very, very different from a Newry-only market or a Belfast-only market, and that's really where we need to sort of focus on a little bit here. So I'll give a few minutes to this. And ultimately, what we did have was money starting to move out of the economy through those exports, and what we also had coming in was money starting to come back in through imports. And that's complex because you've got things going both ways. And probably what cost us is, whenever I spoke to a few people throughout COVID and started trying to estimate how much product and how much e-commerce revenue was moving, a few of them gave numbers, and it's very hard to get an answer on that, but roughly 120 40-foot containers come into Ireland each night, and that is products that have been bought on the internet. So those products are coming in, which means the money is moving out, and that is sort of a key area of focus. And those 120 40-foot containers, that's one thing, but it's also millions of euros of product per day that's going out of this economy that is going to retailers that are somewhere else. And that's the part of e-commerce that we need to focus on, because that's products bought by Irish people that are probably available in Ireland, but going to UK retailers. And exports from the Irish economy into the UK also happens, and some of these success stories are the sponsors today. Some of them are here to speak, and I think that's where we need to focus, because like all these things, it's probably a little bit easier once it's been done somewhere, because parts of that can be taken. We can understand the model. We can see that when someone is seeing success from Newry on Amazon UK and shipping 2,000 orders a day to Manchester customers, that the difficulty in doing that really isn't that far. We just need to harness the knowledge to be able to do it. And that's what today's about. So the balancing act then overall for the economy and for e-commerce and where it fits in is imports versus exports. If there's any Invest.NI people here, this is exactly the same charter that Invest.NI is looking at with regards to revenue exports going outside the 6 counties of the north. But for today's purposes, sort of looking at this as an Ireland whole level, and you'll see a bit, you'll see more shortly as to why I'm looking at it with that lens. So imports are ultimately Irish retail revenue sent outside Ireland. Exports are foreign retail revenue coming into Ireland. And import for us as an economy is a net loss, and an export is a net gain. So it's the balancing act between the two of them, and we have to try and get ahead of that. Now the data is there. Newry consumers spend approximately 19 million on Amazon orders per year. So that's expenditure within a population of 27,000 people. And that's based on average UK spend on Amazon. But to counter that, Newry sells approximately 11 million per year on Amazon. And that's coming from data obtained from SmartScout. Now, what we then see there is we see, yes, imports higher than exports. But I think the shining light for me there is the fact that we're already 55% of the way to making that a balance. And for me, that's the data that we know. There could be some other people that aren't in that data pool that are actually already bringing that closer. But that's what today's about. Today is about the start of us trying to close that gap. So we have to close the gap to deliver an economic surplus or a trade surplus. Otherwise, we sit in a deficit. If we sit in a deficit with e-commerce, then e-commerce has been bad for our retail economy. We're trying to sell the opportunity of e-commerce today. We're trying to explain that. We're trying to make that easier. But if we don't invest as a retail group, then it won't be an opportunity. It will be a deficit, and we'll be on the back foot. Nobody wants that. We just have to take the right steps to make sure we don't end up there. And I've sort of been lying to you so far. I've been very focused on us selling within the UK and Ireland as a group, but the big one here, because of the way things have changed the last while, and Donald Trump only added to that, is the internal domestic opportunity, and that is ultimately the Irish opportunity, the opportunity within Ireland for e-commerce. There's a few reasons behind that. Now, ChatGPT did this image a bit late last night. It looks a bit like a Michael Collins poster that he would have put up somewhere, but this is very much an e-commerce map. You get the point. A bit too Amazon-y with that big plus arrow, but listen, we'll look at better for next year. And the two major things that have probably moved the reality into us thinking about Ireland internally a little bit more for e-commerce is global trade has been severely limited. No matter what happens on the back of last week, it is not as easy to trade into the US and probably other economies as it was a year ago. And the second thing to happen in this was Brexit and the separation of Ireland from UK trade. Now, there's a few people on the panel that understand dual market access a lot better than me. But the big one that came out of Brexit was this sneaky little policy that jumped in just before Christmas, all to do with GPSR. Now, it sounds very like all those other acronyms that nobody really knows anything about it until you get a letter in the post saying you have to comply with it. And then we know a bit more, but we're never fully into it. But ultimately, from December the 13th, any UK company wishing to send a product into Ireland, north or south, as in selling a product into Ireland, has to appoint an EU-based responsible person within their organisation. 90% of people aren't aware of the practicality of this, but a large part of what's going to happen here is messages from companies like Etsy to Manchester, Birmingham, Dundee-based retailers saying, unless you have an EU responsible person, you need to turn off shipping to Ireland because you're no longer complying with UK, EU post-Brexit law. So that's already trickling through, from the Amazon accounts that we speak to on a regular basis. The Irish orders pre-tomorrow.ie on Amazon UK were up by 57% since January. There's a scenario going on there, and the data's starting to come through. But I think ultimately the UK supply to Ireland is dropping quickly. Therefore, the e-commerce spend is looking somewhere else. The easiest place for Irish consumers to look with e-commerce spend right now is retailers within Ireland, north and south. And that is the opportunity that is coming out of what was probably overall a hard situation to read, and then America goes and adds to that last year because our exports to America are always also threatened. So we have a couple of things going on there. The biggest one is obviously the separator that's coming here from an e-commerce point of view between us and our largest retail trading partner, and that is because of that December declaration. For me, that puts a lot more onus back onto us to try and understand why were the sales going across the water why weren't they coming to retailers here? And it also does something else for retailers, and it says, make sure your marketing message is pushing that Irish business ships from Ireland, 24-hour delivery, because that is probably the question that a lot of Irish consumers are going to be asking. Someone in Donegal is going to be comforted seeing that a product ships from Armagh and not from Manchester, because probably on 5% of their orders that are coming from the UK, they're buying it, and within 24 hours they're getting a message saying we can't ship to Ireland because we don't have an EU responsible person. And why that is happening on some of the marketplaces especially is because you often can't segregate your shipping, as in you can't turn a country off. So what they're having to do is leave it on and then cancel the order post-purchase. What does that do for Irish consumers within e-commerce? Makes them really annoyed, drops conversion, and it makes them start to look more insularly into Ireland, and that is where the opportunity exists for us at this moment. So we've a few scenarios on the go here. We've got likely to have slowing exports to the USA. I don't know if anybody saw the piece on RTE, and they're very worried about Kerrygold, they're very worried about spirits and so on. We've got a reduction in UK imports into Ireland that could be a billion, could be a billion plus. You know, IRP Commerce touched upon it and said that the e-commerce opportunity to Northern Ireland is 10 billion overall. So we're looking at big numbers here, that's for sure. Nobody quite knows the way that that's going to fall yet, but there's a lot of zeros no matter what way that falls. And the third one is, can Ireland do better? Can Ireland make more of this? And like, this is down to you, this is down to this group. And we need to bring this on within organisations so that we start to take more of what's there. Now, I've probably gone on a bit too long, but I'll focus on probably the most useful slide out of 25, which is where I should have started on, but I wanted to get into that sort of historic story. And if I could squeeze 17, 18 years of doing this into one very, very small diagram and a couple of short points, e-commerce is really broken into these three. And the first is marketplaces. That's the ones you knew 20 years ago, eBay, then Amazon, the ones that aren't known as much, like Wayfair and Etsy. And that is millions of guaranteed customers, but a dear place to play. Why is it a dear place to play? You typically pay 15% baseline for your commission fee, your commission structure. Your ads and your marketing goes on top of that. That sounds very heavy, but that is bringing you into a network that has millions of guaranteed customers and spend that's already happening. The flip is a website is a road that is probably more complex to achieving revenue. There's no guaranteed customers, but what you do is you own your customer when you get them, and that's really where people are focusing on now. You know, there's a lot of talk about the first time a customer comes into a website and purchases, and that's not where to make the margin. The margin is made off the second, the third, the fourth. And listen, this is an interpretation. Everybody's trying to judge this. We're only 20 years into a massive e-commerce economy, but we're all trying to take our bit. But if I could sort of give you a helicopter view, that's where websites sit. You can't launch a website and expect from day one it starts making a lot of money and turning over a lot of revenue. You have to use the third piece here, which is the social marketing, the assets, the marketing links, the direct traffic, to bring people who are shopping onto your website. And it's really strange for traditional retail, because people used to make a choice to go into a shop and they then chose a product. People are now choosing the product, searching for it, and after that choosing the shop. So the loyalty and their focus has gone much more so on the product than the retailer. And that's in our open marketplace economy. That's when people are shopping on Google Shopping. It's a different story for a brand that has built its presence and people know it and people go directly to it. But that's a long journey unless you have the luxury of being a 100-year-old retailer and you're going to have 1 million people on your site in year one. So it's all about a blend of these. It's all about investing in these. I mean, if I had to give some straight advice, I don't think this can be done for free. It takes time, probably a bit of capital, certainly a lot of focus. And I think your fastest way there is not someone starting from scratch and having to learn everything themselves. I think the fastest way is tapping into the expertise out there. There's a lot of it. You need to go to every one of these that mentions e-commerce. You need to go to the Belfast ones, you need to go to the Dublin ones. You need to start getting an idea of the theme that you're going to go in, and you can understand the USPs of your business that then starts to write your e-commerce journey everybody's a bit different. Some people sell very high value products. Some people sell very low value products. If you sell a low value product, your shipping percentage, your shipping cost for e-commerce is going to be ridiculously high. But the upside of what you have on that with low products is the conversion's really high, so people buy a lot of them. To give you an example, there's about 900 packs of AA Duracell batteries sold on Amazon per day, and that's Amazon UK. Whenever Amazon.ie starts to grow and flourish, there won't be anywhere near that, but there won't be anywhere near the amount of sellers either. So that is where you're starting to look into these new economies and these new places for us to grab revenue from. The rest of the people here today are going to cover this probably better than I did. My job was to give an intro as to why our e-commerce, why our retail economy is changing, how it's changed, and where we need to look to see opportunity. So I'll leave it there. I don't know how we are time-wise, Deborah, if you want any questions or anything, or do you want to just move on? It's up to you time-wise. It's all right if there isn't any. Grant. Listen, thanks for your time. Appreciate everybody listening. Hopefully that was a good start to what will hopefully be a good day. Thank you.